People vanish in these woods. It's not the kind of thing you hear about on the news, and it's certainly not something anyone talks about openly, but it happens more than you'd think. And it's not always the usual cases of lost hikers or careless campers. Those we can explain mostly, but there are others, the ones that vanish without a trace, without struggle, without reason, and when that happens, everything we think we know about this world feels like a lie. I've been a park ranger in Florida for over 20 years, and I've seen things out here that would make anyone question the very nature of reality. You learn after a while that nature doesn't care about logic or human rules or what's supposed to happen. It simply is. And sometimes it takes people. No explanation, no evidence, nothing, just gone, vanished into the shadows of these endless trees and marshes. Story 1. There's a clearing deep in the northern part of the park. A place that doesn't exist on official maps. A place most people could never find unless they truly knew the woods. And even then, it's not a place you want to stumble into. I remember the first time I realized something was off. It was 10 years ago. A missing child report. Her name was Emily. She was maybe 5 or 6, wandered off while her family was setting up camp. Usually these disappearances are brief. Kids are found crying, a little scraped, a little scared, but safe. Not Emily. We searched for 3 days, dogs, helicopters, volunteers, combing every inch, and there was nothing. Then on the 4th day she appeared, standing in that clearing, completely still, staring straight ahead, like her mind had been pulled out of her body. Her clothes were dirty, arms scratched, but otherwise fine, physically at least, yet she wouldn't speak. We tried coaxing, pleading, carrying her back. She resisted with this strange, almost magnetic determination to remain there, her eyes flicking constantly back to that clearing, like something or someone was still there calling her, and I can still remember that look, hollow and distant, the way her tiny body seemed to be tethered to some invisible force I could never hope to understand. The hospital couldn't find a thing wrong, and her parents, haunted and frightened, moved away, leaving that story, that mystery behind, though I've never been able to forget. 5 years later, a man, a seasoned hiker who knew the park like the back of his hand, went missing near the same area. No struggle, no signs, just disappeared, leaving his backpack leaning against a tree with all of his belongings untouched. It was as though he had set it down for a moment and vanished. We searched. Days turned into weeks, yet nothing. The same pattern repeated itself over the years. People experienced, careful, cautious, yet vanished, sometimes returning in a state where they could barely explain themselves, other times never at all. Then last year, a group of 4 college kids came for a weekend camping trip near the river, 6 miles from the station, and 2 of them never returned. One of them staggered back 3 days later, alone, covered in dirt and scratches, shaking, repeating the same sentence over and over. It took them. It took them. He said it started with a feeling, a gaze that followed them through the woods, then whispers, voices like distant conversations but with no one around, until one by one his friends disappeared. No struggle, no sound, just gone. They tried to run, they tried to find each other, but it was useless. By the time he reached the ranger station, he was the only one left. Their campsite was exactly as they described. Tents, packs, sleeping bags, untouched, pristine, yet devoid of the people who'd set it up. Every time we investigate these disappearances, we find the same disturbing pattern. People vanish into the woods, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years. And when or if they return, there's something missing in them, a hollowness in the eyes, a distance like some essential part of their soul had been taken and never replaced. I've read the reports, combed through the files, all the logic, the maps, the theories, and none of it adds up. The oldest legends from the tribes that lived here speak of places where the boundary between worlds is thin, where spirits dwell, and people can be taken if they wander too far. I used to dismiss these stories as myth, fairy tales for children, But after seeing what I've seen, I can no longer deny the possibility, and I certainly no longer wander too far alone. There are areas we call the dead zones, spots in the park where GPS fails. Compasses spin and time behaves strangely. You can walk for hours and feel like minutes have passed, or vice versa. And every disappearance, every strange encounter I've witnessed seems to intersect around these zones. One incident I can never forget involved a family camping near the southern edge. Their son, 10 years old in a wheelchair, simply vanished while they dozed near a small lake, marshmallows still roasting by the dying fire. They searched frantically, calling his name, but there were no tracks, no disturbed ground. His chair left exactly where they'd set it. 2 days later we found him, 50 miles away atop a mountain, uninjured, sitting calmly as though waiting for someone, beside a black and grey German shepherd, with eyes that radiated intelligence and awareness beyond this world. The dog never belonged to anyone, and vanished as mysteriously as it appeared, leaving the boy bewildered but unharmed. Yet no explanation, no trace, nothing that could logically explain the impossibility of it all. Then there's Emily, the girl who vanished and returned unchanged. There are others like her, people who disappear, only to return years later as if no time had passed. Speaking of him, the bearman, something part man, part beast, whose yellow eyes burn into your soul, dragging its victims into caves or hidden places no human should ever enter. I've walked those woods, patrolled those trails, and sometimes late at night, I feel it, a presence, a gaze that follows, a weight that presses against the air around me. There are countless stories like these, older, stranger, each stranger than the last, the lost campers from the 1970s, the mysterious staircase appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the woods, an abandoned set of steps leading up to nowhere, and those who climb it report the world around them shifting, forests twisting into alien geometries, trails disappearing, hours stretching into days, and some never return at all. There are voices in the dark, always calling, always whispering, footsteps that sound impossibly fast, lights seen deep within the trees, figures standing at the edges of campsites, watching silently but never approaching. I've tried to rationalize, to explain it, blaming animals, accidents, hallucinations, even humans living off-grid, but nothing fits. The disappearances, the returned ones, the hollowness in their eyes, the impossible distances covered, the guardian animals appearing and vanishing. They are beyond human comprehension, yet they are real. I have seen them. I have walked in the woods at night, and I know they are waiting, watching, and the moment they decide it will be too late. Every ranger knows it. We whisper the stories among ourselves, but we don't write them down officially, because the public would never believe it. And those who dismiss them have never heard the voices, never felt the eyes, never been alone in the dead zones, never walked out of a place where time and space twist into something unrecognizable. I think about the girl sometimes, and the hiker, and the boy with the dog, and I wonder how many are still out there, waiting for the right moment to step back into our world, or watching us, existing alongside us in ways we can't comprehend. And sometimes I feel the pull myself, a subtle tug at the edges of my consciousness, a whisper in the wind, a shadow just beyond vision, and I know that someday, if I am not careful, I might vanish too. And then there will be another story, another mystery, another set of footprints that simply stop, leaving no trace, no explanation, and no one left to tell what happened. But until that day, I keep patrolling, keep searching, because if I can't stop it, I can at least bear witness. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there will finally understand what these woods really are, and why they have claimed so many, and why they will claim more, because whatever it is, whatever watches from the shadows, it doesn't care who you are, how smart you are, or how careful you are. It only waits, and when it takes you, There is no trail, no struggle, no explanation. Only the quiet knowledge that the woods have taken another, and that somewhere deep in the Florida wilderness, something is always watching, always waiting, and always hungry. Story 2. It starts with a feeling, a chill that runs up your spine, the kind you can't explain, the kind that whispers that something is wrong even when everything looks normal. I first felt it the night the Peterson family went missing in the northern section of the park. They were experienced campers, well prepared, with a teenage son who had grown up exploring these woods. They set up camp near an old creek, one of the more secluded spots, and everything seemed routine. They cooked their dinner over a small fire, laughed, talked about the next day's hike, and settled in for the night. But as midnight approached, something shifted. I can't explain it in logical terms, but it was as though the forest itself had breathed, exhaled, and something had woken up in the shadows. The next morning, the family was gone. Just like that. The tent was still standing, the fire pit still warm, their supplies untouched, yet no trace of the Petersons could be found. No footprints leading away, no signs of struggle, nothing that could indicate where they'd gone. We searched for days. Helicopters scoured the treetops. Dogs combed every inch of the forest floor. Volunteers and rangers fanned out across miles of trail, but it was like they had dissolved into the earth itself. By the third day, frustration had set in, and fear started to creep in. There were stories, old stories, whispers among rangers about this part of the park, about disappearances that couldn't be explained, but we usually chalked them up to overactive imaginations or urban legends. Not this time. This was real. Then came the first clue, or what we thought was a clue. Their son's backpack was found leaning against an oak tree near the trailhead, ripped open, contents scattered. But there were no footprints leading to it, no sign that anyone had disturbed it. It was as though it had been placed there by unseen hands. I remember kneeling beside it, feeling a weight in the air, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes breathing feel impossible. There's a phrase rangers use, though we rarely say it aloud. The park takes what it wants. It sounds dramatic, even silly until you see it happen, until you feel the emptiness where someone should be. Weeks passed. The search was called off officially, but I couldn't let it go. So I walked those trails every day, alone at times, tracing their likely path, hoping for any sign, any clue, anything at all that might explain the disappearance. It was during one of these patrols that I first heard it, the faint sound of music drifting through the trees, distant, ethereal, like a lullaby carried on the wind. I paused, heart-pounding, straining to listen. The notes didn't belong to any instrument I could recognize. They were warped, too melodic, too precise, and yet impossibly distant. I followed the sound for hours, deeper and deeper into the forest until the trail disappeared beneath overgrown roots and tangled vines. And there, in a small clearing, I saw the stairs. They call it the staircase. A set of old stone steps rising into nowhere, unsupported, with no building or platform at the top, nothing to justify their existence. I've seen reports of this before, always dismissed them as pranksters or the imagination running wild, but seeing it in person is different. The stones were slick with moss, the steps uneven and crumbling at the edges, yet they seemed deliberate, as if they had been placed there with intent. I felt a pull toward them, a compulsion I couldn't resist, and the moment my foot touched the first step, the world changed. Time warped. The forest around me twisted into an impossible geometry. Trees bent at unnatural angles. Shadows stretched and recoiled as though alive. I turned back, but the trail I had followed vanished. There was no way back. I never went further up the steps that day, but I knew something had been watching. That feeling, that awareness, the sensation that I was no longer alone in the forest lingered for days. Later, I would hear reports from hikers who had stumbled across the staircase. Some climbed to the top, and returned hours later, dazed and disoriented, unable to describe exactly what had happened, only that the forest had changed, that the trail back was impossible to find, that hours or days had passed, while only minutes felt like they had elapsed. Others never returned. The park keeps records quietly, and each account is eerily similar: confusion, vertigo, a sense of being drawn deeper into the woods. Then there was the case of Sarah L., a young woman who disappeared while hiking with her dog, a border collie. She was an experienced hiker, knew the area well, but the dog returned alone, healthy and calm, as if nothing had happened, with no sign of its owner. Weeks later, the dog led search teams to the edge of a clearing, where the forest seemed wrong, and they found nothing but her gear, left in pristine condition, no sign that anyone had passed through. People think animals get lost or frightened, but dogs know instinctively how to survive in the wild. The calmness of that dog, the intelligence in its eyes, told me she had been taken somehow by something beyond our understanding. Not long after, I received a call about a lone hiker who stumbled into the park station in shock. He had been hiking in the dead zone, a section of the park where compasses spin, GPS fails, and time behaves unpredictably. He claimed to have wandered for what felt like hours, but later realized that days had passed. He described hearing voices calling his name, footsteps following him but never revealing themselves, and seeing fleeting shapes in the corner of his vision. Tall, pale, impossibly thin, moving in ways that defied physics. By the end of the story, his hands shook, his voice trembled, and he refused to enter the park again. It is this dead zone, in particular, that seems to be the center of the unexplained phenomena. Reports of hikers vanishing, of whispers in the trees, of strange figures appearing and disappearing, all seem to radiate from this region. People who have returned describe the forest as alive in a way that's almost conscious, watching, manipulating, reshaping itself around them. Some return changed, hollowed out, silent, eyes distant and haunted. Others never return at all. And still the dead zone remains untouchable, unexplained, a place the park quietly avoids marking on official maps. Families have vanished here too. One mother and father, camping with their teenage son, reported strange shapes circling their camp at night, pale and tall, their eyes reflecting the firelight in unnatural ways. The son swore the figures smiled, too wide, too sharp, their teeth like knives, and moved with a grace that defied human limits. The family ran, leaving everything behind, only to find when they reached safety that no sign of the figures remained. Rangers later checked the campsite. Tents and fires were undisturbed. No tracks, no footprints, nothing. Yet the terror the family described was genuine, etched into their expressions, impossible to dismiss. Then there was the case of a young boy in a wheelchair, whose family had rigged it with all-terrain wheels to allow him to explore deeper trails. One night, the boy disappeared from their campsite. The search turned up nothing. His wheelchair remained untouched, and there were no tracks. 2 days later, he was discovered nearly 50 miles away atop a mountain, sitting calmly with a German shepherd guarding him. The dog had appeared mysteriously, acted protectively, and then vanished without a trace. The boy could not explain how he got there, only that the dog stayed with him, keeping him safe from something in the trees. And then there are the stories that I cannot even fully document, the college students who ventured deep into the northern woods and vanished one by one, the lone hiker who returned, speaking incoherently about voices calling from nowhere, the strange lights that move through the trees late at night, the shapes glimpsed from the corners of your eyes that vanish when you look directly. All of them I've seen parts of, and all of them point to something beyond our understanding, something that does not obey the rules of nature, of physics, of time itself. I've tried to rationalize, to attribute these events to accidents, wild animals or human trickery, But none of it holds. The patterns are too consistent, the details too precise, the experiences too similar across decades. Even the folklore of native tribes, once dismissed as myth, now resonates with a chilling truth. There are places in these woods where the veil between our world and something else is thin, where beings exist that do not belong to our reality, and where people are taken when the forest decides it is their time. I've walked the trails alone, patrolled late into the night, sometimes feeling eyes on me, sensing movement just beyond the firelight, shadows that seem to stretch and breathe. I hear the whispers, the music on the wind, the subtle but undeniable pull that draws you deeper into the woods, and I know with every step that if it wants you, it will take you. No struggle, no noise, no trace left behind, and you will vanish, becoming part of the forest, part of its endless, hungry darkness. Somewhere out there, the Petersons may still wander, lost, held by the forest, or perhaps returned, silent and changed, eyes hollow, knowing something we cannot comprehend. Others like them are waiting in the dead zones near the staircase, in the deep clearings where time and space twist, waiting for the next person to step too far, to listen too closely, to follow the wrong sound. And someday it might be me, it might be you. It might be anyone who dares wander too deeply into these woods, thinking they understand them, thinking they are safe. But the park does not care, the forest does not negotiate, and whatever it is, it waits patiently, watching, hungry. Story 3. It started with a call that no ranger ever wants to receive. Late at night, the phones at the station ring with reports of someone missing, and instinctively, you know this won't be a simple case. This was about a young couple, newlyweds, who had decided to spend a weekend camping in one of the park's more isolated sections. They were adventurous, confident, and dismissive of the warnings we gave about sticking to trails, about the sections of the park locals call forbidden for good reason. The night they vanished, the weather was calm, the stars bright above, the forest quiet except for the occasional rustle of nocturnal creatures. And yet, something in the air was wrong. They had pitched their tent in a small clearing near the edge of an overgrown path. I've walked that area countless times, and something about it feels off. The shadows are too deep, the trees too close together, and the wind seems to whisper even when there is none. That night, they sat by a small fire cooking their dinner, laughing, joking about the isolation. Around midnight, neighbors in nearby campsites reported seeing strange lights moving through the trees, like lanterns, but no one had ventured out to check. By morning, the couple was gone. The tent was intact, their gear untouched, their car still parked a short walk from the clearing. Nothing indicated where they had gone or how. The search began immediately. We combed the forest with dogs, rangers, volunteers, even drones when possible, but every trail led to dead ends. It was as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. I remember examining the site, the fire pit still warm, the air thick with the scent of smoked wood. It was unsettling. There were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing that suggested they had moved beyond the clearing. And yet someone had been taken. You could feel it in the silence, the way the birds seemed to avoid the area, the way the shadows clung unnaturally to the underbrush. Days later, we found the first sign, a small backpack belonging to the bride, resting at the base of a massive oak. It was open, items strewn carefully, almost deliberately. No footprints led to it or away from it, as if it had been placed there by unseen hands. That's when the stories started to circulate among the search teams, stories that I initially dismissed. Whispers of the dead zone, of strange lights, of figures that appear and vanish in the forest. But the details matched reports from decades earlier, reports from hikers, campers, and families who had vanished in the northern sections. The patterns were the same. The forest claimed them. The forest reshaped itself around them. And whatever it was that took them, it was patient, intelligent, deliberate. On the third day, one of the searchers reported hearing voices. He said they sounded human at first, calling out names, then distorted, twisted, almost musical, as if the wind itself had learned to speak. He followed the voices into a dense section of woods where sunlight barely penetrates the canopy. There he stumbled upon the staircase. It's not just a set of stairs, it's a phenomenon. Steps rising into the air with no platform, no building, just stone, moss-covered and impossible, yet perfectly intact. He didn't climb them, but he felt the pull, the irresistible compulsion, and he described the experience as disorienting, almost hypnotic. The forest seemed to bend around him, and when he returned to the trail, hours had passed in what felt like minutes. I later interviewed him in private. His hands shook as he recounted the sensation of being drawn upward, the subtle tug at his mind, and the way the forest seemed alive, aware, watching. He told me that he thought he saw the missing couple, a fleeting glimpse of two figures near the top of the stairs, but when he reached the clearing, they had vanished. His description matched stories from hikers who had climbed the staircase before: disorientation, time distortion, glimpses of people who weren't there, and sometimes the permanent loss of those who climbed too far. Weeks passed, and the official search was called off. But the forest did not let the story die. Locals began reporting sightings, lights moving in impossible ways through the trees, sounds that carried over miles, whispers calling out names of those who had disappeared. One camper reported waking to the sound of footsteps around her tent in the middle of the night. She swore she saw figures standing at the edge of the firelight, tall, pale, unnaturally thin, with eyes that glowed in the dark. When she tried to approach, they vanished. The forest fell silent again, as though nothing had happened, but she was left shaking, unable to sleep, haunted by what she had seen. Then came the strangest part. A ranger on patrol found one of the missing couple, or what appeared to be one of them, deep in the dead zone, sitting quietly beside an abandoned stream. He was disoriented, speaking incoherently, mumbling about the lights and the pull and the ones who watch. His eyes were hollow, distant, and though he was physically unharmed, it was clear that something had taken a piece of him. He could not explain how he had gotten there. The other spouse was never found. The forest, it seemed, had made its choice, claimed one and refused the other. I've walked the trails near that stream many times since. I can feel it. The forest's awareness, the subtle weight in the air, the sense that something watches your every move. You see, it's not just about getting lost. It's not about accidents or animals. The people taken vanish without a trace, and sometimes when they return they are hollowed, altered, as though the forest extracted something essential from them. It's a presence, a consciousness in the woods that does not belong to us, that does not operate according to our rules, and it is patient, unfailingly patient. There are areas the locals refuse to enter, sections of the park where compasses spin, where GPS fails, where time itself seems to bend. People have gone in, hours or days pass differently, and sometimes they return, changed, silent, eyes haunted. Sometimes they never return at all. The missing are not always children or inexperienced hikers. The forest takes those who are confident, experienced, careful, even those who think they know the park better than anyone. And when it decides to take, it does so without warning, without struggle, leaving behind only the whisper of its presence and the chilling realization that it chooses when to release what it claims. I think about the newlywed couple every time I walk through that northern section. I imagine the husband wandering endlessly through warped trails, the wife, if she is still alive, hidden in some unseen corner of the forest, being watched, studied, perhaps waiting for the right moment to be released. And I cannot help but shudder at the thought that the forest has memory, intention, and perhaps a form of awareness that we will never comprehend. It does not act randomly. It knows who to take, who to leave, and the reasons are beyond human understanding. There are stories from rangers before me, tales of hikers drawn off trails by whispers, of figures glimpsed at the edge of vision, pale and thin with eyes that glow unnaturally, of music and voices that lead people into the heart of the dead zone. Each story follows the same patterns. Different people, different times, but the same outcome. Disappearances, hollowed survivors, and the inexorable patient pull of the forest. People call it folklore. I call it documentation. I've witnessed enough to know that rational explanations fall apart in the face of consistent patterns. The staircase remains the most perplexing element. To climb it is to enter a different plane, a space where the forest reshapes reality, where trails become illusions and time warps into something unrecognizable. Those who climb report seeing people who are not there, hearing voices that do not belong to this world, experiencing days in what seems like minutes, and moments that stretch into hours. And some never return, their absence leaving nothing behind but an unsettling silence. I've tried to rationalize all of this. Could it be wild animals? Could it be human trickery? Could it be freak accidents or misadventures? The patterns do not fit. Too many disappearances. Too many similar experiences over decades. Too many stories that echo one another with eerie precision. It is not coincidence. It is not luck. It is something deliberate. Something with awareness and patience. Something that has existed here long before any of us arrived. I've seen people who return from the dead zone or the staircase changed, distant, their eyes haunted, their speech fragmented. They speak of the forest as though it has a mind of its own, as though it chooses who to take, who to leave, who to hollow, and why. And yet no one can define what it is, how it operates, or why it exists. It is a mystery beyond comprehension, and those who experience it are forever marked. Whether they speak of it or not, I walk these trails daily, alone at times, feeling the presence, sensing movement beyond the periphery, hearing whispers and rustling where no wind blows. And I know one day the forest may decide to take me too, not because I am careless or foolish or inexperienced, but because it is patient, it is selective, and it does not discriminate. It watches, it waits, and it chooses its next victim with quiet precision. Every missing person, every hollowed survivor, every glimpse of figures at the edge of vision, every sound that shouldn't exist, these are all pieces of the same truth. The forest is alive. It is aware. And it has claimed more lives than anyone can count. The newlyweds, the hikers, the families, the children, the lone rangers, they are all part of the forest now, or they are waiting somewhere beyond our understanding until the forest decides it. Story 4. It started with a missing hiker report, though by the time we got the call I already had a bad feeling in my gut. These woods have a way of doing that, making you sense something is wrong before you even see it. The hiker was a young man, early 20s, an experienced camper, someone who knew the park trails better than most of our seasonal rangers. His friends reported that he had gone off on a solo hike to explore a remote part of the northern forests. He never returned. Usually, someone with his experience can navigate the trails and check in regularly. This time, however, nothing came back. No call, no signal, no trace. We launched the search immediately, combing miles of rugged terrain with teams of rangers and volunteers. Drones buzzed overhead. Dogs traced every possible trail, yet the forest seemed determined to keep it secret. Every familiar landmark felt different. The northern trail that the hiker knew like the back of his hand had changed somehow. The bends seemed sharper, the trees denser, the sounds of the forest strange, almost amplified, like the woods themselves were alive and listening. It's hard to explain the feeling, but it's the same unease I've seen in countless missing person cases here. the realization that the forest is not passive. It watches and sometimes it decides. On the second day, a ranger reported finding a series of unusual markings along the trail. They weren't animal tracks. They weren't human footprints either. They were deep scratches in the bark of several old oaks, arranged in patterns almost like someone or something was leaving a message. The patterns didn't make sense at first, but then we realized they repeated along the trail subtly, as if guiding or warning someone. We followed the marks, hoping to find the hiker, but the trail seemed to vanish into dense undergrowth. Hours passed, and every direction we tried looped back to the same spot, like the forest had reset itself. It was that evening when we first heard the voices, low, indistinct murmurs almost carried by the wind, calling out names. At first it seemed impossible. No one else was nearby and the radio channels were clear. The voices whispered and shifted, like echoes bouncing through time and space, and one of the younger rangers swore he heard the hiker's name being called repeatedly. He followed the sound into a thick patch of cedars and disappeared for nearly 10 minutes, re-emerging shaken, staring blankly into the woods. He couldn't explain where he had gone or what he saw, only that it felt like the forest had reached out and touched his mind, probing, testing, watching. By the third day, something truly unexplainable appeared. The hiker's backpack was found near a small stream, untouched except for a single item, a camera lying face down in the mud. We picked it up carefully, hoping for clues, and when we examined the footage, it was unlike anything I had ever seen. At first, it showed him walking along the trail normally, checking the map, glancing at the trees. Then the camera angle changed, as though the lens itself was moving without him holding it. The forest looked wrong, elongated shadows, trees bending unnaturally, and then in the corner of the frame, faint shapes. Pale, elongated figures, gliding silently behind him, always just out of focus. The footage cut abruptly, with a few seconds of static and then nothing. We kept searching day after day, but each hour the forest seemed to fight back. Trails twisted and looped endlessly. Familiar landmarks appeared in impossible places, and even the GPS unit stopped functioning. It was like stepping into another version of reality, one shaped by the forest itself. I've seen this before, in old reports and accounts, in stories passed down between rangers. The forest as a living entity, aware, patient, selective. And the deeper you go, the stronger its pull. Then came the sightings. On the fourth day, a volunteer reported seeing the hiker, or someone who looked like him, standing on a hilltop several miles from the last known point. He appeared frozen, facing the forest, not moving, not responding, just staring. When the volunteer called out, the figure vanished instantly. The same day, another ranger saw shadows moving through the trees, shadows that seemed impossibly tall and thin, with glowing yellow eyes just at the edge of perception. Some of them vanished when looked at directly. Others seemed to drift closer, testing, observing, but never fully committing to an attack or confrontation. By the fifth day, the psychological strain on the team was noticeable. Hikers and volunteers reported hearing footsteps behind them in the underbrush, feeling being followed, even when no one was visible. Radios emitted faint whispers, faint static that almost sounded like voices in distress. One veteran ranger refused to return to the northern sector, claiming he had felt the forest touch him, and that it was better left alone. The others pressed on, though unease hung heavy over the entire operation. It was on the sixth day that the hiker reappeared, or at least someone who looked like him. He was found near an old stone bridge, miles from any trail, sitting quietly with a vacant expression, mud-streaked and disoriented. At first glance he seemed unharmed physically, but his eyes told a different story. Hollow, distant, and haunted, they conveyed a sense that something had been taken from him, some fragment of his soul or mind. He couldn't explain how he had gotten there. He only muttered phrases over and over. The forest. It watches, it waits, the others they call. He refused to elaborate, and every attempt to coax answers was met with panic, terror, and incoherent babbling. Over the following weeks, I reviewed old reports, looking for similar patterns. This wasn't the first time someone had disappeared in the northern woods and returned in a state like this. There were accounts of hikers who vanished for days and came back changed, unable to describe where they had been, some unable to remember basic details, others speaking only in whispers about lights, figures, and voices. Some disappeared entirely, never returning. The forest had claimed them, reshaped reality around them, and left only fragments behind. The most unsettling aspect of this case was not the disappearance itself, but the subtle, undeniable awareness in the forest. Those who experience it describe the feeling of being watched, of trails bending to mislead, of time itself warping. Some claim that the forest can manipulate perception, showing glimpses of people long gone, creating illusions of companions who are not there, calling out names in distorted voices, and leading travelers deeper into isolated areas. Those who follow are rarely seen again, and those who return are never the same. I have walked these trails countless times alone, and the feeling never fades. The northern woods feel alive, sentient, patient. It watches, studies, tests, and sometimes claims those it finds curious or unprepared. The hiker's return was both a relief and a warning. He had survived physically, but was forever changed mentally. A hollowed version of the man who had entered the forest days before. His story is consistent with dozens of accounts over the years, and I fear for anyone else who wanders into that northern section unprepared. What is most terrifying is the unpredictability. The forest doesn't act according to logic or pattern. It chooses, waits, and manipulates. Experienced hikers, novices, families, and lone travelers alike, no one is immune. And once you enter, the forest may decide to keep you for reasons we will never understand. Trails change, time shifts, voices lure you, shadows move in ways that defy physics. And then, just as suddenly, you may be returned or you may not. I sometimes think about the hiker, sitting quietly on that stone bridge, eyes hollow, mumbling about the forest that watches and waits. I imagine the figures he glimpsed in the shadows, the lights in the trees, the unseen forces that bent reality around him. And I know that those northern woods still hold countless secrets, unseen, unknown, and deadly. There are areas no one dares enter, corners where compasses fail, GPS signals die, and the forest itself seems to breathe. The forest is patient. It observes, it chooses, and I have learned that it will not stop. Over the years, hikers vanish, families disappear, and even rangers find themselves tested in ways that cannot be rationalized. The forest is ancient, aware, and alive, and it does not forget. The hiker survived, but he carries the imprint of the forest's presence in his eyes, in his mind, in his very being. I continue to patrol the northern trails, documenting, observing, and reporting. I know that one day the forest may claim me too. And when that happens, I hope someone will remember the stories, recognize the patterns, and understand the patient, deliberate intelligence that lies within those trees, those shadows, that unbroken canopy of green hiding the unimaginable. Story 5. It was one of those unusually still nights in the Florida park, where the usual chorus of frogs and insects seemed to pause, leaving only a heavy silence that pressed against the skin. I was on the late-night patrol, making my usual rounds along the less-traveled trails. About halfway through my shift, the radio crackled, another missing person report. This one was different. A mother had reported her teenage daughter missing, last seen near one of the park's small lakes on the eastern edge, an area known for its dense undergrowth and almost impenetrable marshes. The girl was 18, an avid hiker, very familiar with the park, and yet somehow completely gone. We arrived at the lake within the hour, flashlights cutting through the darkness, casting long, wavering shadows across the trees. The mother was frantic, pacing near the shoreline, pointing out where her daughter had last been. It was a spot most experienced hikers avoided after dark, even in summer. The swampy ground, tangled roots, and sudden drop-offs could easily lead to injury or worse. We started searching immediately, calling her name, scanning with flashlights, shining beams across the water and into the thick tree line. Hours passed, and the only sounds were our own voices echoing back from the silent forest. It was around midnight when the first strange occurrence happened. One of the search volunteers, a college student with a flashlight, froze mid-step. He was pointing toward the lake, voice trembling, and when we turned to look there was movement, small ripples on the surface, though the lake should have been calm. Then faint whispers carried over the water, not just ordinary echoes or the wind rustling through the trees, but voices, soft, urgent, almost pleading. At first we thought it was our minds playing tricks, but the way the whispers moved, drifting from one tree to another, then toward us, it became undeniable. Something in the woods was speaking, calling, or perhaps warning. By the second night, search teams were growing anxious. The girl had been missing nearly 24 hours, and every trail we followed seemed to vanish or loop back on itself. Trees that should have been familiar looked alien under the moonlight, twisted in ways they hadn't before. We tried to stay close to the main trails, but something kept drawing us deeper. Equipment malfunctioned, compasses spun wildly, GPS units glitched, and our radios emitted a low static that occasionally formed whispered words, "Stay, come, follow, don't leave." No one wanted to say it out loud, but we all felt the same chilling reality. The forest itself was alive, aware and in control. It was during a brief pause in the search, as we gathered near a fallen cypress tree, that another volunteer screamed. I spun around and saw her pointing to a shadow among the trees. Something moved unnaturally, too fluid, too fast, vanishing behind the trunks before we could get a clear look. Every instinct screamed that it wasn't an animal. It had a presence, a consciousness, and it was aware of us. That was the moment when I realized this was no ordinary missing person case. Whatever had taken the girl, or whatever was in the woods, was not only intelligent but patient, waiting, observing our every move. The third day brought our first tangible clue. We found her backpack half submerged in a muddy creek. Everything was intact except a small notebook she carried. Inside, pages were smeared and torn, but a few entries survived. They weren't typical diary entries. Instead, they described feelings, intense dread, the sensation of being watched, shadows following her through the underbrush, and whispers calling her name. One entry made my blood run cold. "I don't think I'm alone anymore. They're here, watching, waiting. I can feel them." It was written hours before she vanished, possibly in a panic. The entries confirmed what we feared. The forest had become sentient to her perception, and she knew it. By the fourth day, strange phenomena escalated. The search party reported hearing footsteps in places no one was walking. Twigs snapped behind them, but when they turned, nothing was there. Some swore they saw fleeting glimpses of a figure, tall, thin, humanoid, but with unnaturally long limbs and glowing eyes that disappeared when confronted directly. Even the dogs, normally reliable, refused to enter certain sections of the woods, growling and cowering as if sensing a threat invisible to humans. Those of us who had spent years in these woods knew fear when it was real, and this was unlike anything we had experienced. Then the girl returned. Not by walking out of the woods, but appearing suddenly on the side of the main trail, as if the forest had spat her out. Her clothes were torn, mud-caked, and wet, but she was unharmed physically. That would have been a relief, if not for her eyes. They were distant, empty, like she had seen things that no one should ever see. She didn't speak for hours, just stood staring at the trees, blinking slowly, as if the forest's presence lingered inside her mind. When she finally spoke, her words were fragmented, disjointed, almost like someone else was translating her thoughts. They were everywhere, watching, waiting. I was taken, but not really gone. They let me return, but they're still there. We tried to understand what happened, piecing together her fragmented recollections. She described being led into a part of the forest that didn't appear on any maps, a hollowed grove surrounded by towering cypress and oaks. Shadows moved along the edges, sometimes forming humanoid shapes, sometimes just whispering lights. Time had no meaning there. She felt hours stretch into days and days collapse into moments. She was aware that she was being observed constantly, and though no one touched her physically, she felt that some essential part of herself had been claimed by the forest. For weeks afterward, the girl remained in a daze, haunted by recurring visions of the woods. She spoke of glowing figures, pale and silent, that moved just beyond vision, whispering in tongues she didn't understand. At night she would wake screaming, insisting that the forest wanted her back, calling her name. We documented everything, though I doubted anyone outside our team would believe the details. The psychological impact was profound, not just on her, but on every ranger and volunteer involved in the search. The forest had imprinted itself on our minds, its presence lingering even when we were miles away from the site. Later, I reviewed historical accounts of the park, looking for similar patterns. Reports went back decades. Hikers and campers vanishing without trace, returning changed or disappearing permanently. The phenomenon always involved the same northern and eastern sections of the park, isolated, densely forested areas where the underbrush was nearly impassable. Witnesses frequently reported unusual lights, voices calling names, and figures glimpsed only in peripheral vision. Dogs would act erratically, equipment would fail, and compasses and GPS units would become unreliable. Even seasoned hikers disappeared, proving that skill or preparation offered no protection. One theory suggested that the park sat on a unique ecological anomaly, a place where natural electromagnetic fields distorted perception and time. Others whispered of older forces, remnants of native folklore, spirits or guardians of the forest that predated human settlement. Whatever the explanation, the results were consistent. The forest was selective in who it claimed, patient in how it acted, and terrifyingly intelligent. Those who returned often carried scars that no one could see, but were deeply etched into their psyches. Months later, I revisited the eastern lake, alone this time. The water was calm again. The frogs and insects had resumed their chorus, and the surface reflected the moonlight perfectly. But as I walked along the trail, I felt it, the same heavy, observing presence. Leaves rustled when no wind blew, shadows shifted where they shouldn't. I thought of the girl and her empty, haunted eyes, and understood something I hadn't fully realized during the search. The forest doesn't just claim you physically, it marks you mentally, leaving an imprint that persists long after you leave. And in that moment, I knew that anyone who enters those woods may never truly escape, no matter how far they walk. To this day, I avoid the eastern lake and the northern trails unless absolutely necessary. Every time I pass nearby, I sense that patient awareness, like something is waiting, measuring, observing, deciding. And I know that somewhere, deep in the shadows, the forest still holds the secrets of those it has taken, and perhaps those it has allowed to return, changed and broken. I cannot explain it fully, nor can I rationalize it. But I know the truth in my bones. The Florida forest is alive, intelligent, and patient. And when it wants someone, it takes them. And sometimes it lets them come back, even now. Years later, I cannot shake the memory of that night, the whispers over the lake, the shadows moving just beyond my vision, and the hollow stare of the girl who returned. Every ranger who has worked in these woods knows this truth, though we rarely speak it aloud. The forest is a predator unlike any other. Silent, patient, and infinitely aware, and it waits for its next visitor.